With the changes to save data in Season 2, you are wasting points, and today I'm going to prove it, not only with math, but with a real example to help you build better decks in Season 2. Cosmic here, welcome to the channel, and I have gotten a ton of requests to go into the save data and all the changes that have been made because honestly, it completely changes how we should be building decks in Season 2, that if you do not have a one-turn cycle deck, spoiler, you're doing it wrong. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry because I'm going to fully break it down in the video. But up front, let's talk about the changes and just have a nice overview that I've put together, much like I did for Season 1. But the biggest and most important change up front is that we can now remove 5 cards, and that alone is going to completely change what we were doing compared to Season 1. You can now further optimize your decks in new ways, but this also means you might have been wasting 40 points based on at least the save data that I've been seeing in the community Discord as well as Reddit, because people don't realize just the extra consistency that you get by removing what is effectively going to be 6 extra cards. That is huge, absolutely massive. So up front, let's talk about the changes. We have the card removal, so anything on this top row is going to be 20 points. However, all the new cards that you generate throughout the course of the run, those all have a cost of 0. But again, keeping in mind, you can only remove 5 at most. And there are a good number of double removal events, so I'm very excited to see how this is going to change the meta. But do keep in mind, this is something that we'll have to test a little bit more and refine, but I really love what this is looking like so far. Now, the one just beneath that a lot of people were caught off guard by is that the arena effects do have a cost. And this one is really interesting because you can also get mythic quality gear on here. So this is a way to like pseudo save some points depending on how you want to mitigate the cost of copy cards, which we'll give in our example. But the arena effects are honestly a bit all over the place right now. So while I don't want to say anything too definitive and just in terms of like how many you should be looking for, because the most I've gotten in a run so far, I think is 4, because you can also buy them from the shop and then upgrade, right? So you get 2 arena plus the final boss plus buying them from events. So 4 should be the max, which means 40 points. But generally speaking, as I was going through this kind of number crunching example, I would recommend saving 20 points in your build because getting the extra like mulligan or getting the extra filtering or damage amp from spending 20 points is going to be a really good use of your overall new cap of 180. Neutral cards are similar, always going to be worth 20 whether they have an epiphany or not. Forbidden cards, if you want to go back and do Season 1 save data, are always going to be worth 20. Divine stayed the same. That is going to be a plus 20 on top of whatever you put it on. So, for example, if you're going to have a monster card plus a divine, it's going to be 20 plus that amount. So a legendary monster divine is going to be 100 points. And believe it or not, you do have enough points for that now, which is crazy. So divines, keeping that cost. Monster cards overall complete. We rework in case you missed it. The common versions, which are going to have the gray or white text, are 20 points. The rare ones, which are going to have the blue text box, are 50. And the legendary ones are going to be 80. And honestly, Dominion's pretty insane, so definitely understand why that is still 80. And then copy cards did change in a pretty significant way. So for your first and second copies, meaning 3 copies total of a card in a deck, it costs 0. And then when you make that 4th copy, it's going to cost 40. Again, keeping in mind if you are using this for divines, the cost itself would be 20, 20, and then 60 for the overall cost gain. So I have some notes here just on the side of like my initial early thoughts in terms of what I would focus on. And yes, we're going to prove that the 3rd copy isn't always correct. Then also focus on one-turn deck cycles. So what do I mean with that? In case you missed our Narja video where I break this down in far more detail and talk about the process of how I got there, effectively, you should be asking the question is, what do I want to do every single turn? What is the most optimized plays that I can make? And then working your way backwards from there. Removing extra cards or having retained cards in your deck can increase the overall consistency. So what we focused on with this deck that was like honestly an over 100-hour investment for how much min-maxing I did over the course of 2.5 weeks, we eventually got to a point where we could very, very consistently loop a full hand of Vulture ejections, get a massive amount of damage, get a bunch of shields, and could just keep doing that every single turn. And this deck is now so good, and I've refined it so much that it has been able to completely full auto clear everything in the game. So this deck is what our final deck looks like after we've played all upgrades, exhausted all extra cards, what have you. So that is the most important thing to remember. Think about what your end game looks like and work backwards from that point. So for today's video, and just to give an actual example, we are going to go over 9, which has been a pretty controversial character so far, just in terms of how people are building her out. But one of the most important things and kind of disclaimers that I'm going to add up front here is that Hugh has a honestly very frustrating part of it where once you get to that final level, it does not loop back in the same turn. What does that mean, right? As you are going through your sequencing and as you are casting this card, if you do not fully optimize your deck, you'll find a spot where you are now splitting this up over 2 different turns, and you'll find yourself at the start of a turn with a Ironclad level 3 or Extreme level 5 in this instance. You'll have like 2 Fighting Spirits, but as soon as you play this card, it's gone, meaning you are wasting AP. So this is where having a 1-cycle deck really is important, and understanding how many times do I need to cast this card in a row. If you want to cast Ironclad, you need 4 total casts. And if you want to do Extreme and not do the cheeky way to max level, which, spoiler, I think is going to be the only realistic way to play this card, you're going to want to cast it a total of 6 times in a turn, which is very difficult, it turns out. So let's talk about points. Let's talk about an example here. And we'll talk about the final deck at the very end and why this is so important. So yes, this is going to be a little shocking to see, but the important thing to note now is that we can remove extra cards. No more times are you going to have to sit there and think about that whirlpool. So starting with Ray, and again, we are just using this as a free-to-play example, we are going to remove her basics, which is normally, 60 that it would cost across that. And you'll notice that we do have a divine here for snack time, which is, of course, going to cost 20. Now, keep in mind, because we only have 5 removals, if you are someone who is playing a multi-hit character where Predator's Blade is very, very good, then I would consider removing, Strike of Darkness or just some other card to keep Predator's Blade and Resonating Darkness, because those are traditionally going to be your 2 best. Strike of Darkness we kept here just because it's a upgrade. And again, keep in mind, we just want to focus on how do we get the least amount of cards left in the deck for what is called a 0-card support, or effectively 0 card, because all their cards have been either exhausted or you get a card that's just going to cycle and draw itself in case you run into it. So for this example, we have 80. And then for Mika down here, you can see that we're removing Blessing of Waves and Whirlpool as the extra cards. Tactical Analysis is going to be an upgrade. Deluge already is an upgrade itself. And then we have, once again, back Source of Water. Now, yes, technically you want the one that gives you more AP. I just used the one that I had from my save data. But effectively, you want a plus draw plus AP card for Mika, because as we all know, that is the best way to cycle through your deck, get the extra AP that you need, and go from there. Now, so that is 80 points. For 20 points, we have the Arena, because as I mentioned, one of the things that you want to focus on is getting that final upgrade at the boss at the end of the run and hoping that you hit a mythic piece. Now, you'll notice that on this item example, it is a weapon that has a mythic armor equipment on it, so it doesn't really seem to matter which part you put it on the actual buff. And also keep in mind, as you are replacing the gear as you're going through your chaos run, you get to keep that buff. So you're always able to add that on and just swap out parts as needed. So while an upgrade might be on a blue earlier in the run, you can swap it up to a legendary later on and still have that benefit. But there are some very, very strong effects for these cards. So for 20 points, I think this is just a no-brainer. You always want to do one of the arenas at a minimum because it is so good. And I would also maybe recommend doing both, strictly because it gives you the best chance, because you can only have one of these effects for where it has like the little arena icon. So you do get 2 chances basically to find the right version you need. And then of course the boss gives you your last one. Now for Ray, I would recommend copying just 1 copy of Snack Time, because it does have the AP Divine on it, and it just helps with your overall setup, making sure you're playing out all your upgrades on your first turn. So 1 or maybe 2 of these at most is okay, but I would not recommend 2 in this case, because you'll notice we will have exactly 60 points left over for Ray, which means we can use Elemental Phoenix now in our deck, which is going to be a monster card, as well as still get an arena buff on top of it. And I'm going with the Elemental Phoenix in this example as just a monster card, because it has resolve. I'm just take any monster card that you might want to get from the chaos itself, or maybe you're going back and farming other chaos and there's a different one you want to use, right? In general, you can use a rare monster card, which is really good, but for the sake of the Ironclad version of 9 that we're going to talk about, the resolve is really great, especially just getting the extra 40% shields. Perfect. It's actually a very significant buff in this example. Or if you are doing something that, for example, does not have a monster card that you really need in that chaos for whatever reason, you could then instead get an extra copy of Snack Time just to help with your setup turns and then take 2 additional arena buffs. However, for the example of Mika, good news is we can copy the max source of water. However, we do not have points left over now for the arena buff. So do keep that in mind. And this is where it becomes really important to understand how much AP you need per turn, because even removing one of these would open up a significant amount of points. But just for the sake of the consistency in the example that I'm going to use later, I am using the maximum amount of source of water that we can use, showing that we cannot get any arena buffs or neutral cards otherwise because we run out of points. And this would be the most optimal for our example that we are going to use. Now let's talk about 9, talk about the actual tower cards itself. So this one's going to be very controversial, but promise you it's going to be correct once we get to the end and you see the vision of it. So for the example of Ironclad, which is going to be more the tower build for 9, we have the one that gives us more defense, right? And then for Counterblade, this is where it gets interesting. So Counterblade itself, now this is one I will admit that I was wrong about, because I did not know about the extra removal, which gives us a massive, massive consistency increase. So I would recommend using the card is exhausted, gives you honed edge here to buff up your attack even more. And it's going to be very easy to upgrade that. Now, where this becomes interesting, right? If you look at Fighting Spirit, and just trust me for the sake, I'll show it at the end. You only want to copy this 2 times. Do not put a 4th copy of Fighting Spirit in your deck. I promise you it's not correct, and you'll see why at the end. So here's where it becomes interesting. In the arena, we do have various effects that give us a significant damage increase for technically only 10 points. And you can also get these increased damage effects from other gear going throughout. So if we're able to save a Fighting Spirit from our deck, and if we do not take the extra on cast effect, if we use this version of Counterblade, we are technically saving, because we're not copying, 40 extra points for our build that we can then use for the arena stuff. So this is one of those things that we'll have to wait a little bit longer to see all the different arena buffs that come together. But if you are able to cycle through your deck and you find a spot where you have exactly enough Fighting Spirit plus this version of Counterblade to make sure that you are max cycling your hue every turn, that is technically going to be correct, because you are effectively getting a free copy of Fighting Spirit every single turn. Again, as we talked about up front, the most important thing to do so that you don't brick your turns is get hue to go from the base copy to level 3 every single turn, and then have it reset for your following turn. So that means that even if we take, whichever version of Counterblade, because it doesn't affect your point total, we have over 100 points left over for a optimized 9 deck, meaning we could even take Dominion if we really wanted to. Now, the one thing I will add as a note here on the side with Experience Strike, there are ways to have other damage increases depending on what characters you're using. I didn't want to do a full deep dive, or this would be like a 45-minute video on all the different combinations for 9. But do keep in mind that you are going to still have cards for your other combatants that are most likely going to give you a better buff than what Experience Strike is going to do, especially in the case of Orlea, who seems to be 9's best partner in this case, or well, I should say combatant, right? Combatant partner. You don't want to use Experience Strike because it effectively cancels out the entire point of running Orlea to begin with. And also, you might be running other shielders that Ironclad is not going to be the main focus for damage, but you just want more shields. So do keep that in mind. This is something that is going to vary a little bit depending on who that extra character is. But Fatal Strike, once you optimize your deck, like the whole good part about Fatal Strike is that it can exhaust to a higher level, but once you optimize your deck, you're going to cycle it every single turn and maximize out your hues. Now, The other example to talk about is going to be Extreme. And honestly, I don't know how you do this one, right? This is very interesting because it puts us in a position where you just want to have Luke or somebody else that can maximize the amount of exhausted stuff that you're doing. And because Counterblade counts everybody in your party, you are just getting a free damage boost off of it, plus a massive nuke, because you're always going to be able to go up to 1200% damage. So this is like a weird extra support damage build for 9 that you can put together. And same thing, because we're not copying anything, because again, the Hue Extreme is unique, the Fatal Strike is unique, the upgrade, every version of it is unique, so you can't even cheat and do like the don't epiphany it yet and copy it, and that, like, there's nothing to copy in this deck that is going to be optimized. Now, again, Experience Strike, technically, if you want to do the increased damage, depending on who your other characters are, you could run that one extra card and maybe like hope for a Divine on it if you really want to, but we are focused on maximizing the amount of removal every single turn. And you'll notice, once again, we have over 100 points to really work with here, or I guess I should say 100 points because depending on how much arena you take, that we could still use Dominion. And the reason why I focus on this is because you want cards that are going to remove themselves and still give you a massive buff. There are some neutral cards that do exhaust, like the Black Lumen, which gives you a bunch of extra draw, which can be nice, but we need to spend a little bit more time with the season and figure out what are the exact neutrals that we want to be using. So in the example with the Extreme build, it is likely most correct to not copy anything and just let the Ignition play off the part to go into that big swing and just knock that out every turn and effectively turn 9 into a 2-card deck that is just doing a massive amount of damage up front. So that brings us to the last point. Okay, what does this really mean? What does all that boil down to? Well, this is what is the optimized deck for 9 once you boil it down for a free-to-play style of account, which means, as you'll note here, this is technically a extra upgrade or extra cast of the copy, which, because we're removing that, you can fit a extra upgrade in the deck, be it through monster cards, be it through whatever you want, arena, whatever you find, because as you'll notice, if this is our final deck and we have the Source of Water, we have the extra draw, we have the extra AP, we can just cast the level 2 Hue because it only costs 2 AP, and we can cycle through our deck every single turn. And then just for funds, I put like the numbers over here. And this is, of course, before buffs, before any type of like divine upgrades you get. If you have Dominion going, if you have Orlea that's giving you buffs, right, whatever it might be. For a single target for the Ironclad build, you're doing 2,800 defense-based damage single target, as well as looping 960% shield. And spoiler, if you find a way to get Resolve and add that on to get 4 more triggers of shields, it's going to be pretty sick for the amount of shielding you get. And then just for the point of reference, I did include my Calipe full auto build here as well, which for single target is technically only 976 defense damage. However, that does mean after 3 targets, Calipe is going to be doing more damage overall, but most importantly is going to be the shield amount. Shielding still is going to be Calipe thanks to Overpower and how insanely busted that it is. So if you find yourself that you are still struggling and don't have enough shields in tower, spoiler, Calipe is still going to be the best. And I will also say, it's just kind of a sidebar here at the end, is I did test 9 full auto to try to like, let's do another full auto 9 build. And actually, it worked out pretty well. Like the AI actually played Fighting Spirit and then saved the Hue self-cast until the very end. I was actually kind of surprised by that. So this is, again, what the end deck is going to look like. Again, keeping in mind that you are going to have 3 AP at the start. You're going to be drawing 5 cards. And when we have Source of Water to give us the extra draw to cycle through and draw an entire deck every turn, as well as the extra AP generation, you have everything you need right here. And you do not want to use the last version of Fighting Spirit, meaning you are likely wasting 40 points in your build. And I'm going to be so honest, I've seen enough people that have 4 copies of Fighting Spirit, and myself included, because in my initial tests, I did not realize how bad Hue was, and I do think Hue needs to... I think Hue should loop. That's my hot take. That's my hottest take for this video. Devs, please buff Hue, because there's no reason why it should stop at that last level 3. Just come on. Give us a little bit more action to play with here for these decks. But Let me know your thoughts down below. Did this breakdown help? Are you now more confident in building the right decks for Season 2? Or do you think that there's just still a couple questions that you might have? Let me know down in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to answer them. But again, I really just want to break this down and try to highlight just how important the extra removal is, because now that we have effectively 6 less cards in a deck, we can now always optimize for 1-turn decks, and that is the brand new meta in Chaos Zero Nightmare. So that's going to do it for today's video, my friends. So until next time, make sure to stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.